The Minnesota Vikings were one game away from the Super Bowl last season. In the offseason, they went out and gave the keys to the Brinks truck to Kirk Cousins with the expectation that he's a guy to get him to the big game. Now, was that a real expectation to have, or did Cousins make out like the Hamburglar in this situation? We'll break that down and more as we preview the 2018 Minnesota Vikings. Let's take a look at some of the key storylines heading into the season as we go into our 4-minute offense. The Vikings allowed all three quarterbacks from last year's spectacular season to walk in free agency and went out and acquired a new one by signing Kirk Cousins of the Washington Redskins. Now, the passing numbers on paper the last 3 years are outstanding for Cousins. 3 straight years over 4,000 yards passing, over 80 touchdown passes, passer rating averaging in the mid-90s, completion percentage averaging over 66%. I mean, it's a fantasy football player's perfect quarterback, but we all know that football is no fantasy, and the real numbers that should take precedence are 9-7, 8-7-1, and 7-9. Those were the records of the Redskins the last 3 seasons, and before quarterback wins is in the stat, folks, hop into my mentions as well as the helping weapons, folks. You have to understand the reason why Washington never really got over the hump and only made the playoffs once during Cousins' time there as a full-time starter is because of his play in situational football, and that's third down offense, 4-minute offense to close out games inside the red zone. That's where Cousins has his struggles, or had his struggles. That's probably more important than any attribute you throw out there for quarterback play. That's where the Vikings excelled last year with both Bradford and Keenum, and that's where they'll need Cousins to excel this year if they want to get to the Super Bowl, especially after awarding him a fully guaranteed $84 million contract. One thing Cousins didn't have the luxury of having during his time in DC is a game breaker in the backfield, and that's what the Vikings have in second-year running back Dalvin Cook. Last season, Cook was well on his way to all sorts of all-rookie honors before tearing his ACL in the 4th game of the season, and the hope is that he shows no ill effects from the injury and is able to hit the ground running this upcoming year. But this sort of brings back into question the injury history he had in college, albeit it was shoulder issues and nagging hamstring and ankle issues. He only missed 2 games in the 3 years at Florida State, and hopefully this is the last one he'll have to deal with because he brings a special element to their offense and they'll need him out there for the full 16 games. Another key addition in the offseason was the hiring of new offensive coordinator John DeFilippo, who comes over from the Philadelphia Eagles. He played a big role in the Eagles' offensive success last year, and I know for a fact that he coveted Kirk Cousins this offseason and he got his wish. Coming off what we saw the Eagles do offensively in conjunction with some similar personnel on the perimeter that the Vikings have, one can only imagine the things he can come up with this season to help this offense top an impressive 2017 campaign. The work he can do with Cousins is how he's going to be judged as an OC for Minnesota. Last year, the Vikings had the #1 defense in the NFL. They were also #1 in the most important defensive statistic that's out there, and that's points allowed, only giving up 15.8 points a game. Obviously, you can always find room for improvement, and that seems to be what the Vikings wanted to do this offseason with the signing of the talented defensive lineman Sheldon Richardson and the drafting of cornerback Mike Hughes in the 1st round of the NFL draft. Richardson comes over from the Seattle Seahawks and gives the Vikings a versatile defensive lineman that's capable of playing anywhere along the defensive front. Hughes was one of the best corners in the draft. He graded out as my #1 corner because of his versatility and ball skills. He can play either outside corner or inside as a slot defender. In my opinion, he's already the 2nd best corner on the roster. Both additions just makes this already great defense even better. One of the reasons for optimism for the Minnesota Vikings is an obvious one, and it's the elite defense that they possess. Here's what makes this defense so special. There's an elite player at each and every level of their defense. These are guys that are arguably the best at their position, so when you have what could essentially be considered a Pro Bowl defense, how could you not be optimistic heading into the season? The talented duo of Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are another reason I have a lot of optimism about the Minnesota Vikings. All they do is get open and make plays. And if we're being honest here, these two really bailed out Case Keenum a lot last season and combined for over 2,000 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. The tight end position also offers some optimism as well. Kyle Rudolph, the veteran, H-back David Morgan, and rookie draftee Tyler Conklin out of Central Michigan will remind new offensive coordinator John DeFilippo of the depth chart that he had back in Philly. This is going to be a really good group this year. One of the causes for concern will be the expectations levied on quarterback Kirk Cousins. He's being billed, and paid for that matter, as the savior for this football team to finally get them that elusive Super Bowl title. I don't know how that's fair to Cousins, but to expect someone who hasn't proved to be of that level to come in and be that guy it's setting yourself up for failure. You have to ask yourself, if Cousins was of that caliber, why would the Redskins let him walk out the door? Another cause for concern, albeit a slight one, is the offensive line. They were vastly improved over 2016, and you hope that last year wasn't an anomaly and a sign of things to come. Now, there will be a new starting five this year with Joe Berger retiring, and there will be some competition for the right tackle job and some reshuffling on the interior. There are some players coming back from injury like Nick Eason and some draft picks that could also be in the mix. But you also have to worry about finding that cohesiveness as a group, and the hope is that it is solved before the regular season begins. You can also have a concern about the kicking game. In the NFL draft, the Vikings made Daniel Carlson the highest drafted kicker in franchise history. So that speaks volumes of what they think about him and his skill set, which also means that they're expecting him to be both effective and consistent from day one. If he struggles during the preseason, this could be a potential problem spot moving forward. Now, here are some quick takes about the Vikings as they head into training camp. Two breakout candidates for 2018, in my opinion, are wide receiver Laquan Treadwell and cornerback Mackenzie Alexander. I think a guy like Treadwell could have a Nelson Aguilar type breakthrough being paired with DeFilippo and actually getting targets thrown his way. He's still a pretty good receiver, in my opinion, and should see himself blossom this year for the Vikings. Alexander, in my opinion, should be a shoo-in for the slot corner duties. I think he's the third best corner on the roster. Let's see, that's Xavier Rhodes, Mike Hughes, and third-year corner Alexander. In my opinion, he was built for slot duties. A couple of camp surprises are two rookies who get my vote, and that's tight end Tyler Conklin and linebacker Brett Taylor, who's an undrafted free agent out of Western Illinois. Conklin has special traits that can make him a problem as a rookie, and Taylor was one of the more productive linebackers coming out of the FCS and has a chance to make a dent in that depth chart because of how he excels in the pass defense department. Rookie impact players for the Vikings this year are going to be guard Kobe Gossett and cornerback Mike Hughes. Gossett was one of those drafted offensive linemen I alluded to earlier that can make a significant impact on this offensive front. I had a really high grade on him coming out of Appalachian State, and Hughes can not only have an impact in the secondary, but also on special teams as he's an outstanding returner as well. And from a fantasy football perspective, Dalvin Cook would be a good option to pick up. I think second or third round value for him based off him coming back from injury, but he's a guy that can score from anywhere on the field and could be an asset in the passing game. I would also say that Mr. Fantasy Football himself, Kirk Cousins, would also be a good option. The road to the Super Bowl for the Minnesota Vikings goes as follows. Kirk Cousins plays well situationally. If he can add that to his game, he can finally break through and become a Super Bowl quarterback. That's the difference from being known as a winner to being known as just a stat patter. Also, the defense has to remain excellent. I think this is 99% going to happen. It's hard to see a drop-off in production from a group that's young, athletic, and confident, and it has gotten better in the offseason. And finally, Dalvin Cook has to pick up right where he left off prior to his injury. Having game breakers in the backfield just adds a whole new dimension to your offense and a whole new set of problems that a defense doesn't want to face on game day. All three things here are capable of happening, and if they do, the Vikings can make the trip to Atlanta come February. I have the Vikings finishing third in the NFC North. As effective as they were on offense last year, I think that's where there's going to be a slight regression. Defensively, they'll be excellent and could even win some games on that side of the ball alone. But right now, for me, I have way more concerns about the quarterback play in critical situations to put full confidence in them repeating as division champs. They'll be in that group of about 3 to 4 teams that'll battle for the final wild card spot in what looks to be a very competitive NFC this season. So that's it for our 2018 NFL season team preview. Be sure to follow me on all of our social media accounts. Also check out and subscribe on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast, and to find other NFL team previews for our 2018 NFL season kickoff, visit the YouTube channel at youtube.com/footballgameplan and click that subscribe button.